we are doing something very radical that is really changing the reality.
Walls, checkpoints, rules, laws that stop us from meeting each other are designed to keep us invisible from each other, and it makes the dehumanization process easier.
The world, particularly Israel-Palestine, is dominated by male leaders, has ended up in a complete quagmire, in a state of mutual victimization in which each side claims moral virtue by having suffered more. What could be more perverse than that?
There's a lot of peace movements in Israel, but there's nothing that is led and thought and felt by women. So that was 40 women in the very first meeting. Now we're 40,000. We're the fastest growing grassroots movement in Israel right now, and the most active physically out there in the streets.
The 21st century really belongs to women, and we haven't yet seen, I think, a full force of women's power emerge.
We don't want another war.
We unify around the notion that only a political agreement will finally bring peace to this region. It's not going to be another war. It's not going to be if we purchase more tanks and more airplanes.
Just look at this place, how small it is and how long the history of it and how many walls were built and how many walls were taken down. This wall is going to come down.
We are all victims of the patriarchy that is for thousands of years, that the patriarchy that make us split. So enough of that.
Both sides have searing wounds that define their collective psyche, but celebrating suffering, it embodies toxicity, and we have to move beyond that poison.
Today is for the women who are courageous enough to ask for the unaskable peace.
We are an Israeli movement, and we have the support of our beautiful and courageous Palestinian sisters.
I do believe that this conflict is actually entrenched in a sense of deep losses.
We are tired of paying the price of our children being buried.
The Palestinians see now that there is a real partner on the ground who is trying to change the dynamics inside Israel.
So we are saying it's a myth that it's impossible to do peace here. It's a myth.
I don't think that women can change the political leadership now, but at least they can do the re-education of both people about the other. Everyone who came through this city for thousands of years have a stake in this city. Jerusalem is important for everyone in the world. Her doors have to be open to everyone, and that's the equation for peace.
The new thinking and what we try and drive here is that when we make something more accessible, it ends up being more accessible for everybody.
You've got a very dynamic area, unlike anywhere else, not just in the United States, but anywhere else in the world.
Be very specific about how we build. So every time you resurface a street, you need to make sure the curb cuts are in place, for example.
Access to building, access to transportation.
The evidence is all around us, and I don't think we oftentimes stop and look back at what we were facing 2 generations ago.
For granted, they don't understand how beautiful it is to put on your own socks, to put your shoes on, to tie your shoes. You wake up in the morning, you go to the restroom, you take a leak or you take a dump, whatever you want to do, and that's it. You don't think about it. Waking up takes at least 32 different steps. That includes bathing, putting on your socks, your shoes, your clothes, the equipment necessary to transfer me from the chair to the bed and from the bed to the chair. If you don't have the inner spirit, that inner drive that wants to see another day, wants to see a better day, then those two things collapse. It's not so bad to be a quadriplegic. You know, at times I even return, you know what? Being a quadriplegic ain't shit. I say that to myself. It's nothing. There are other people who are suffering worse. I need to schedule someone to come in and help me dress, help me bathe, help me dress, help me catheterize, take my blood pressure, take my sugar levels, and see how things are going. Once that's done, then they put me in the chair and my day begins. I not only exceeded the 5 years tops that the doctors had predicted for my life.
Nos dijeron que él no iba a vivir más que 20, 25 años, cuando mucho, por la edad.
But I went on to not only 5, then 10, 25, 30, 35, and now 40. I have been given the opportunity to live a pretty normal life, extremely normal. In fact, getting in trouble along the way throughout those 4 decades. What's next? I'm 56 years old now. What do I want to do? Well, what I want to do is I want to give back to the community. I want to give back to people who are suffering from the same condition or similar.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slaves will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
One fine summer day, 1963, the great march for civil rights took on Washington, D.C. They marched for freedom, they marched for jobs, they marched for dignity. They marched for the conscience of a nation, for justice and equality. 250,000 gathered there in Washington that day. Hear the Reverend Dr. King lift his voice and say, I have a dream, and we witnessed history. Now it's up to all of us to carry the legacy. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. From the streets of Birmingham to that Nobel Prize he won, Reverend King let freedom ring, shines his light for everyone. Now people anywhere who've been denied their rights find vision, strength, and inspiration to carry on the fight. So we're saying, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. touched and loved. You can't keep the trees from reaching for the sky above, and you can't stop the river from rolling to the sea, and you can't keep the people from the hunger to be free. So we're singing, we carry the dream of the way this world could be. We carry the dream of justice and equality. When we gather together, we find strength and unity. Yeah, we carry the dream. All people shall be free. Shall be free. Shall be free. All people shall be free. We carry the dream. 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 Peace and justice. We carry the dream. Equality. We carry the dream. Human rights. We carry the dream. We carry the dream. We carry the dream.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
My name is Sharon Kyle, and this is my husband, Dick Price. And we live and work here in Mount Washington. I've lived in Mount Washington since 1994, 95.
Yeah, so we've been together 18 years. Initially, we lived together where I was living in Torrance. She was commuting to JPL, but she had a house already on Mavis Drive here in Mount Washington. So we moved up here, had a bedroom for my daughter. One time we were coming back from church, and my wife and my daughter liked to go to open houses. Me, not so much, but it was a beautiful Sunday afternoon coming back from church, and there was a bunch of signs, and I said, okay, well, what the heck? Let's go drive up the hill. And we went over on this house on Crane Boulevard, and the sales agents were smart enough to lead us out onto this deck with this gorgeous view of Highland Park and Pasadena, and we put in an offer that night.
Yeah, so that was my plan. Of course, he didn't know that that was the plan. I go to open houses every chance I get, and I already knew about Crane, and I knew I wanted to live on Crane. And so that's where we've lived now since 2006. November 2006, we moved to Crane. So I've loved Mount Washington since the first time I saw Mount Washington. When I was looking to buy a place, I was a single woman, a single mom. I actually had 2 children that are now adults. But the real estate agent asked me, well, what kind of property are you interested in? And I knew I didn't have very much money. I loved hills. And so he says, have you ever heard of Mount Washington? And I had not. And I was living in the San Fernando Valley. I had worked for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I worked for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory for 23 years. And he took me to Mount Washington, and the very, very first house I saw, I fell in love with. But I knew that you don't put in a bid on the first house. So 30 houses later, I ended up buying that first house. And I've always been politically active, engaged, but when I was a mother, being a mother, raising kids, and having a really demanding career didn't afford me the discretionary time to get as active in politics as I would have liked. However, I loved being in the Mount Washington community because it has an eclectic vibe. Lots of my neighbors and friends in this community are involved in progressive politics. Many work in the entertainment industry. But my experience in Mount Washington was such that even though I was very busy, I could get up early in the morning and go for a beautiful walk in these lovely trails, just right in my own neighborhood. Lots of birds and flowers and trees, and I love nature. And the first house I bought felt like a tree house. It was down in a canyon, and I would have, at any given point, raccoons or skunks or possums, all kinds of birds. There was an owl for months. An owl was nesting right outside of my daughter's window, and we'd hear him at night, and he was really loud. But it was just a wonderful environment to raise kids in.
I'm originally from Minnesota, and I've lived in New York City and Washington, D.C., but I've been out here since the 70s. And my LA experience has been Venice Beach, Manhattan Beach, Torrance. And then when we connected, and all those places were okay. I mean, they were just standard residential areas. Venice was kind of weird. But then when we connected 18 years ago, this was kind of like going back to Minnesota. I mean, I had not, when we met through online dating, and there's a whole story about that. But then when I saw it said she lives in Mount Washington, I said, well, shoot, she doesn't even live in the state. I mean, that's what I knew of Mount Washington. And then we got here, and I couldn't, I mean, it's really a kind of a paradise. And when you think about it, it's right in the middle of 20 million people. But if you don't look too far into the distance, it seems like you're way out in the country.
Yeah, it feels like
it just gives you a different sense of being.
And we've devoted our lives to disseminating information about social justice and volunteering with organizations who focus like the ACLU. And there are a lot of ACLU members that live in this community.
In Los Angeles, to the outside world, people think we're magnificently diverse. But we know if we live here that many of us go to church with our own race, go to work with our own race, socialize with our own race. And the thing you do about that is you have to make some conscious decisions to live differently. Now that's easy with us because we got diversity at home, but we choose to do some things on the west side with mostly white people. We go down to LA Can with mostly black people. And that's not...
And the Latinx community,
right.
And we do this with intention.
And it's not accidental. And so how do, as they say these days, writ large, how do Angelenos solve some of that diversity? Well, you have to be making some decisions. You have to pay attention to who, if you're only associating with your own clan, then you're not going to understand anybody else.
And that's why I talk about the centrality of race. If progressives are really serious about wanting to create the kind of civilization, society, community that we want, you got to be intentional about desegregation. That's the only way it's going to work, in my opinion.